You are weak, and I denounce this marriage to my son. It ends now.
You should go home.
I can't just leave, not like this.
I'm no longer interested in this marriage. I want you to sign the divorce papers.
Please, be calm. We can settle this.
She is my granddaughter.
Husband threw his pregnant wife out during a gala. 50 guests were watching. Cameras were rolling. His mother took the microphone and did the unthinkable. Let's talk about integrity, about knowing your place. She mocked her daughter-in-law's background, her village, her parents. This woman had just closed the biggest deal their company had ever seen. While 8 months pregnant, while exhausted, while everyone else took credit. And now, her mother-in-law was erasing her, calling her unworthy in front of everyone who mattered. Her husband sat there, silent, watching his mother destroy his wife. Then he stood and said, "I think you should go home. You're clearly not well." As if her objection to public humiliation was a symptom. As if being destroyed was something she should accept quietly. But just as the doors were closing behind her, a wealthy old man arrived. He walked into that ballroom, took the microphone and said, "She is my granddaughter." What happened next exposed decades of lies, stripped them of everything they thought they owned, and turned their night of cruelty into the most public reckoning they'd ever face. This is how it happened. Hello, my beautiful family. Welcome back to my channel. Before we jump into this story, we need to go back to how it all started. But before then, I need to ask you something real quick. If you've been watching my stories without subscribing, you're basically telling YouTube you don't want to see more of these life-changing stories. And I know that's not true, right? So do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. It's free, it takes 1 second, and it helps me keep bringing you these powerful stories. Also, drop a comment telling me what time and where you're watching from. I read every single one, and it helps the algorithm show this to more people who need to hear it. Alright, let's get into how this all began. Maria entered the grand conference hall with a quiet dignity that immediately contrasted the ostentatious wealth surrounding her. She wore no designer labels, no extravagant jewelry, and carried no entourage, but there was a confidence in her posture, a subtle power emanating from intelligence, discipline, and years of unwavering hard work. The room buzzed with the energy of high-level executives and investors, men and women who had built empires on negotiation and influence, their watches glinting under crystal chandeliers, their tailored suits worth more than most people earned in months. But Maria didn't need any of that. She let competence speak. She took her seat near the center of the mahogany table, opened her leather folder, worn but meticulously organized, and waited. Around her, conversations flowed about market projections, quarterly earnings, and the deal that had been slowly dying for 6 months. 3 firms had tried to close it. 3 had failed. The tension in the room was palpable. Reputations were on the line. Millions were at stake. And everyone knew it. When the lead investor, a silver-haired man named Richard Caldwell, opened the session, his tone was aggressive, almost dismissive. He'd seen countless negotiators crack under his scrutiny. "Let's not waste time," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Your last proposal was insulting. Frankly, I'm not sure why we're even here." The room shifted uncomfortably. Maria's colleagues glanced at each other, unsure how to respond. But Maria didn't flinch. She didn't rush to defend. She simply listened, her eyes steady, her expression calm. Caldwell continued, listing objections, pointing out flaws, his voice growing more confident with each passing second. He was testing them, pushing to see who would break first. When he finally finished, the room fell silent. Everyone waited. Maria set down her pen, folded her hands, and spoke. Her voice was calm, measured, but it carried a weight that made everyone lean in. "Mr. Caldwell, I appreciate your directness. Let me address each of your concerns, starting with Clause 7. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She walked him through the deal point by point, dismantling his objections with facts he couldn't argue, countering his strategies before he even voiced them. She'd spent 2 weeks studying every document, every clause, every loophole his team had used to stall negotiations. She knew his moves before he made them. She understood not just the contract, but the psychology behind every tactic. And she used that knowledge like a scalpel, precise and undeniable. Within 30 minutes, Caldwell's confidence had shifted to curiosity. Within an hour, curiosity had turned to respect. By the time Maria finished, the room had transformed. Executives who'd been checking their phones were now taking notes. Assistants who'd been whispering in corners were silent, listening. Caldwell sat forward, his earlier aggression replaced by something almost like admiration. "You've done your homework," he said. Maria nodded once. "I don't waste anyone's time, including my own." He smiled then, a genuine smile, and extended his hand across the table. "Let's finalize this." By the end of the day, the deal was closed. Signed. Done. Seasoned professionals, men and women who had spent decades in boardrooms, were shaking her hand and asking where she came from. One older executive, a woman with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, pulled her aside. "That was masterful," she said quietly. "How long have you been doing this?" Maria smiled. "Long enough to know that preparation beats performance every time." The woman laughed. "I'd hire you in a heartbeat. Don't let anyone underestimate you." Maria thanked her, but she'd heard those words before. She knew how quickly admiration could turn to envy, how easily respect could be weaponized. Her future husband noticed her that day, not because she flirted, not because she tried to stand out, but because competence is magnetic. He was an executive in the same company, sharp enough to recognize talent when he saw it, secure enough to admire it without feeling threatened. After the session ended, he approached her in the hallway. "That was impressive," he said. She turned, meeting his gaze with the same calm she'd shown in the boardroom. "It was necessary." He smiled. "Most people would have celebrated. You're already thinking about the next deal, aren't you?" She didn't deny it. Success doesn't pause. They talked for 20 minutes. Not about personal things. Not about where they were from or what they liked to do on weekends. They talked about strategy, about markets, about the psychology of negotiation. It was the kind of conversation that revealed character, the kind that built respect faster than any amount of small talk ever could. Over the next few months, they worked together on 3 more deals. Each one Maria closed. Each one, he watched her work with quiet admiration. Their connection wasn't built on romance. It was built on something deeper. Mutual recognition of intellect and drive, a bond that neither ego nor wealth could distort. When he finally asked her to dinner, it wasn't to charm her. It was to understand her. "You don't talk much about yourself," he said one evening over coffee. She shrugged. "My work speaks." He nodded. "It does. Louder than most people's words." But he wanted to know more. Not to judge. To connect. "Where did you learn to negotiate like that?" Maria hesitated, then answered honestly. "From necessity. When you grow up with nothing, you learn quickly that preparation is the only advantage you'll ever have. So you prepare better than everyone else." But not everyone was impressed. From the back of the conference hall, that first day, a woman had been watching. His mother. She hadn't clapped when Maria closed the deal. She hadn't smiled when others congratulated her. She'd simply observed, her expression neutral, her mind already calculating. That evening, at a private family dinner, she asked her son about Maria. "She's brilliant," he said, his voice carrying genuine enthusiasm. "Where's she from?" his mother asked, her tone carefully controlled. He paused. "Does it matter?" His mother sipped her wine, her gaze steady. "It always matters." She made calls. Quiet ones. Discreet inquiries through well-placed contacts. Within 2 days, she knew everything. Maria's village. Her parents' modest income. The scholarship that had carried her through university. The small apartment she rented on the edge of the city, clean but simple. The clothes she bought on sale and wore until they frayed. The fact that she sent half her salary home every month to support her aging parents. To most people, these facts would have been admirable. Evidence of character, of loyalty, of strength. But to Maria's future mother-in-law, they were proof of inadequacy. In her world, respect wasn't earned through work. It was inherited through bloodlines, through wealth accumulated over generations, through connections forged in elite circles. And in that world, Maria was an outsider. She always would be. The judgment had been passed before Maria ever set foot in the family home. The battle lines had been drawn before Maria even knew a war was coming. And the weapon of choice wasn't loud or obvious. It was something far more insidious. It was doubt delivered in whispers. It was humiliation wrapped in politeness. It was a slow, deliberate campaign to prove that Maria, no matter how brilliant, no matter how hardworking, would never truly belong. When Maria was first invited to the family home weeks later, she felt it immediately. The coldness. Not in the temperature. In the air. The estate was massive, intimidating in its elegance. Every detail designed to remind visitors of the wealth and power contained within its walls. The mother greeted her at the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome," she said, the word sounding more like a warning than a greeting. Maria stepped inside, her instincts already alert. Dinner was served in a dining room that could have seated 20. Crystal glasses, silver cutlery, a table polished to a mirror shine. Maria's future husband sat beside her, his hand briefly squeezing hers under the table, a silent gesture of reassurance. But his mother sat across from them, her gaze sharp, assessing. The questions started small, polite, almost friendly. "That's a lovely dress, Maria. Where did you get it?" Maria answered honestly. "A boutique downtown. I've had it for a while." The mother's smile tightened just slightly. "Thrift." Maria kept her voice steady. "No, just smart shopping." A pause. Then the next question. "And your family, dear? What do they do?" Maria had expected this. She prepared for it. But preparation didn't make it easier. "My father worked in construction. My mother sold produce at the market." The mother nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "How humble." The word hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking. Maria felt the judgment in every syllable, the condescension wrapped in politeness. But she didn't react. She couldn't. Not here. Not yet. Her future husband tried to shift the conversation. Maria just closed the Garrison deal. Saved the company millions. His mother's expression didn't change. How efficient. It wasn't a compliment. It was dismissal. Cold. Final. As if Maria's greatest professional achievement was nothing more than a clerk filing paperwork. The rest of the dinner passed in painful politeness. Every question from his mother was a test. Every answer from Maria scrutinized. By the time they left, Maria's jaw ached from maintaining her composure, from smiling through thinly veiled insults, from enduring a judgment she'd done nothing to deserve. In the car, her future husband apologized. "She'll come around," he said, his voice hopeful. Maria didn't answer. She knew better. Women, like his mother, didn't come around. They dug in. They waited. They planned. But Maria had faced worse. She'd grown up in a place where survival required strategy, where every opportunity had to be fought for, where nothing was given and everything was earned. She'd learned early that silence was a weapon, that patience was power, that endurance outlasted aggression. So when she walked into that family home and felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her, she didn't break. She adjusted. She endured. She prepared. Because she knew something his mother didn't. Quiet strength, the kind built in poverty and sharpened by necessity, was more dangerous than any wealth. It didn't announce itself. It didn't need to. It simply outlasted everything else. And Maria was very, very good at outlasting. The seeds of war had been planted that night. Not with shouting, not with confrontation, but with a single, silent truth. His mother had decided Maria didn't belong. And Maria had decided she wouldn't leave. What happens when quiet dignity meets calculated cruelty? The answer would unfold slowly, deliberately, and with consequences no one in that room could have anticipated. From the very first evening in her husband's home, Maria sensed an undercurrent she could neither ignore nor confront directly. The mother-in-law, a figure of polished elegance, operated with the precision of a strategist. each word and gesture carrying the weight of unspoken judgment. 3 months had passed since the wedding. 3 months of smiles in public and insults behind closed doors. 3 months of watching her achievements systematically erased. The pattern was subtle at first. So subtle that Maria questioned whether she was imagining it. But women who've survived by reading between the lines don't imagine threats. They recognize them. At the weekly family dinners, Maria would arrive in her simple but neat dresses, always polite, always prepared to contribute to conversations about business and strategy. But before she could speak, her mother-in-law would interject with questions designed to remind everyone in the room of Maria's origins. "Maria, dear, how is your mother? Still at the market?" The question would come with a smile, delivered in a tone that sounded like concern but carried the sharp edge of condescension. Maria would answer calmly, "She's well, thank you. She's proud of her work." Her mother-in-law would nod slowly, that same controlled smile never wavering. Of course, hard work is so admirable, especially when one has no other options. The attacks were surgical, precise, designed to humiliate without being obvious enough to call out. One evening, as guests filled the living room for a business reception, Maria wore a dress she'd saved for months to buy. It was elegant, tasteful, and appropriate. But as she entered, her mother-in-law's eyes swept over her with barely concealed disdain. "Oh, Maria, that's different. Where did you find it?" Maria kept her voice steady. "A boutique on Fifth Avenue." Her mother-in-law's laugh was soft, almost sympathetic. "Well, it's certainly bold. Not quite what we usually wear to these events, but I suppose it works for you." The comment landed like a slap, quiet enough that most guests didn't notice, sharp enough that Maria felt it deep in her chest. Her husband, standing nearby, opened his mouth to say something, then closed it. He'd seen the exchange, but didn't know how to intervene without making it worse. Maria smiled, excused herself, and walked to the balcony. She stood there for 10 minutes, breathing slowly, reminding herself that reacting would only give her mother-in-law exactly what she wanted. This was the game. This was how power worked in this world. Not through loud confrontations, but through whispered judgments that accumulated like poison. But the cruelty didn't stop at words. At work, Maria continued to excel. She closed deals that others couldn't, identified opportunities that seasoned executives missed, and earned the respect of clients and colleagues. Yet somehow, when reports were filed and presentations were made, her contributions vanished. One afternoon, after Maria had spent 3 weeks negotiating a partnership with a European firm, her husband presented the deal to the board. He stood at the front of the conference room, outlining the strategy, explaining the terms, accepting congratulations. Maria sat in the back, watching. Not once did he mention her name. After the meeting, she approached him in his office. "Why didn't you mention my involvement?" she asked quietly. He looked up from his desk, genuinely confused. "I thought it was understood. Everyone knows we work together." Maria shook her head. "No, they don't. They think you did this alone." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Does it really matter? We're married. Your success is my success." Maria felt something shift inside her. "It matters," she said softly. "Because when credit is taken without acknowledgement, it's not a partnership. It's theft." He stared at her, surprised by the directness. "You think I'm stealing from you?" She didn't answer immediately. Then, carefully, she said, "I think your mother is teaching you to see my work as something that belongs to you. And you're starting to believe it." He denied it, of course. But over the following weeks, the pattern continued. Maria would close deals, draft strategies, identify risks, and watch as her contributions were quietly attributed to others. Sometimes to her husband, sometimes to senior executives who hadn't been involved at all. And each time, when she tried to speak up, she was met with the same dismissive response. "You're being too sensitive. You're overthinking this. We're a team. Why does individual credit matter?" But it did matter. Because recognition wasn't about ego. It was about survival. In a world where respect determined influence, and influence determined power, being erased meant being vulnerable. And Maria was beginning to understand just how vulnerable she'd become. Her mother-in-law knew this. She designed it this way. Every compliment Maria received from a colleague was quietly undermined in private conversations. Yes, she's quite capable, but she does require significant guidance. Every success was reframed as luck or support from others. Well, with the resources we've provided, anyone could have closed that deal. It was a masterclass in subtle destruction, so carefully executed that Maria couldn't fight it without seeming paranoid or ungrateful. Then came the pregnancy. Maria discovered she was expecting 3 months after the wedding. When she told her husband, his reaction was immediate and joyful. He held her close, promised her everything would be perfect, assured her that this baby would bring them even closer. But when they told his mother, the reaction was different. She smiled, of course. She said all the right words. How wonderful. A grandchild. But her eyes told a different story. To her, this wasn't a blessing. It was a complication. A pregnant woman couldn't work as hard, couldn't travel as easily, couldn't be discarded as quickly. And that made Maria more dangerous. Because a child meant permanence. It meant Maria wasn't just a temporary inconvenience that could be quietly removed. She was now tied to the family in a way that couldn't be undone. So the attacks shifted. They became more pointed, more deliberate. At a dinner party 2 weeks after the announcement, Maria's mother-in-law addressed a group of investors. We're so thrilled about the baby, of course. Though I do worry about how Maria will manage. Motherhood and career are such a difficult balance, especially for women who aren't used to having support systems. One of the investors, a woman in her 50s, raised an eyebrow. Maria seems incredibly capable. I'm sure she'll manage just fine. Maria's mother-in-law smiled sweetly. Oh, I'm sure she'll try. But reality can be quite different from ambition, can it? The comment hung in the air, subtle enough to sound like concern, sharp enough to plant doubt. Maria's husband, sitting beside her, reached for her hand under the table. But he didn't say anything. He didn't correct his mother. He didn't defend Maria. And in that silence, Maria understood something she'd been trying to deny. He was changing. The constant whispers, the subtle insinuations, the repeated suggestions that Maria was difficult, overly sensitive, or incapable of balancing work and family. They were working. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, his perception of her was shifting. He still loved her. She believed that. But love without trust was fragile. And trust, once poisoned, was almost impossible to restore. Have you ever watched someone you love start to see you through someone else's eyes? Over the next few weeks, the distance between them grew. Conversations that used to flow easily became stilted. He questioned her decisions more often. Are you sure you should be traveling this much? You're pregnant. Maybe you should let someone else handle this deal. You need to rest. My mother thinks you're pushing yourself too hard. Every concern sounded reasonable. Every suggestion seemed caring. But underneath, Maria heard the message clearly. You're not capable anymore. You're a liability. You need to step back. She tried to explain what was happening. One night, after another tense dinner, she confronted him directly. Your mother is manipulating you, she said. He looked at her, his expression a mix of frustration and disbelief. That's ridiculous. She's just worried about you. Maria shook her head. She's not worried about me. She's undermining me. Every chance she gets, she's planting doubts in your mind. He stood up, pacing the room. You're being paranoid. She's my mother. She wants what's best for us. Maria felt tears sting her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Then why does she only say these things when I'm not around? Why does she question my abilities in front of investors? Why does she take credit for my work? He stopped pacing, his jaw tight. Because she's proud of this family. She's protective. And maybe, Maria, you're too proud to accept help. The words hit her like a physical blow. She stared at him, seeing for the first time how deeply the poison had spread. He didn't believe her. He believed his mother. The woman she'd married, the man who'd respected her intelligence and admired her strength, was disappearing. In his place was someone who saw her as fragile, difficult, and ungrateful. Maria didn't argue further. She simply nodded, left the room, and locked herself in the guest bedroom. That night, she cried for the first time since the wedding. Not because of the insults, not because of the stolen credit, but because she was losing her husband to a campaign of whispers she couldn't fight. And the worst part? He didn't even realize it was happening. Can cruelty disguised as concern destroy a marriage from the inside? Maria was about to find out. By the time Maria reached the midpoint of her pregnancy, the orchestrated isolation had become nearly unbearable. Her husband, once a staunch defender, had grown distant under the subtle influence of his mother. Whispers and insinuations replaced support. Doubt replaced trust. Distance replaced love. Maria could feel it in every conversation, every glance, every moment of silence that stretched too long between them. 6 months pregnant, carrying twins, the doctor said, and she'd never felt more alone. The morning sickness had been brutal in the first trimester, but she powered through, closing deals from her laptop while fighting nausea, answering client calls with a smile they couldn't see while her body betrayed her. But now, in the second trimester, the physical exhaustion was nothing compared to the psychological warfare. Her mother-in-law had perfected the art of the invisible attack. At a charity gala 3 weeks ago, Maria had worn a maternity dress she'd carefully selected, elegant but appropriate for her growing belly. She'd arrived with her husband, his hand briefly on her back as they entered, a gesture that felt more like obligation than affection. The room was filled with investors, colleagues, and socialites, all gathered to celebrate the company's quarterly success. Maria had been instrumental in that success, having closed 2 major deals that quarter alone, but as the evening progressed, she realized her name would never be mentioned. Her mother-in-law took the stage midway through the event, microphone in hand, her smile radiant under the spotlight. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she began, her voice smooth and practiced. "This quarter has been exceptional for our company, thanks to the tireless work of our executive team." She went on to list names: her son, the CFO, the head of international relations. She praised their vision, their dedication, their strategic brilliance. Maria stood in the back of the room, one hand resting on her belly, listening to her own achievements being attributed to others. Not once was her name mentioned. Not once was her contribution acknowledged. When her husband took the stage to add his own remarks, Maria waited, hoping he would correct the record. But he didn't. He thanked his mother for her leadership, thanked the team for their support, and accepted congratulations with a humility that would have been admirable if it weren't built on lies. After the speeches, guests approached Maria with polite smiles. "You must be so proud of your husband," one woman said. Maria forced a smile. The whole team worked hard. Another guest, an older man who'd been in business for decades, leaned in. "Make sure you take care of yourself, dear. A woman in your condition shouldn't be worrying about work." The condescension was wrapped in concern, but Maria heard it clearly. "You're not capable anymore. You're just a pregnant wife now. Your value has expired." She excused herself and found a quiet corner near the balcony doors. Her husband found her there 20 minutes later. "You okay?" he asked, his voice careful. Maria didn't look at him. "Why didn't you mention me in your speech?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I thank the team. You're part of the team." She turned to face him, her eyes searching for him. "I closed the Bergman deal. I negotiated the terms for the Singapore expansion. I saved us from losing the Whitmore account when they threatened to pull out. And you thank the team?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Maria, you're making this about ego. It's not. We're all working toward the same goal." She felt something break inside her, something she'd been holding together through sheer will. "It's not about ego. It's about respect. And you've stopped giving me any." He stared at her, frustration flashing across his face. "You're being unreasonable. My mother said you might get emotional during the pregnancy, but I didn't think." Maria cut him off, her voice low but sharp. "Your mother said. Do you hear yourself? Every time you doubt me, every time you dismiss me, it's because your mother said something. When did you stop thinking for yourself? He stepped back as if she'd struck him. That's not fair. Maria's laugh was bitter. No. What's not fair is watching you become someone I don't recognize. Someone who takes credit for my work and blames my objections on hormones. The argument ended there because they were in public, because causing a scene would only give his mother more ammunition, because Maria was too exhausted to fight a battle she was clearly losing. They drove home in silence, the space between them in the car feeling like an ocean. That night, Maria lay awake, her hands resting on her belly, feeling the twins move inside her. She dreamed of this moment, of becoming a mother, of building a family with the man she loved. But now, carrying his children, she'd never felt more isolated. How do you fight an enemy who operates in whispers? How do you defend yourself against accusations that are never spoken aloud? The next morning, at breakfast, her mother-in-law was already seated at the table when Maria came down. "Good morning, dear," she said sweetly. "Did you sleep well?" Maria poured herself tea, her movements careful and controlled. "Well enough." Her mother-in-law smiled. "I'm glad. You looked quite tired at the gala. Perhaps you're overextending yourself." Maria met her gaze directly. "I'm managing fine." Her mother-in-law's smile didn't waver. "Of course. But as a mother myself, I feel compelled to remind you that your first priority should be those babies. Work can wait. Your health cannot." The words sounded caring, maternal. But Maria heard the real message. Step back. Disappear. Let the men handle the important things. Maria set down her teacup with deliberate care. "My work is important. To me and to this company. I won't stop because it makes anyone uncomfortable." Her mother-in-law's eyes hardened just slightly, a crack in the pleasant facade. "I'm not suggesting you stop, dear. I'm suggesting you prioritize. Something many young women struggle with when they try to have it all." There it was. The subtle implication that Maria was selfish, that her ambition was a character flaw, that wanting both career and family made her somehow deficient. Maria stood, her chair scraping softly against the floor. "I've been prioritizing since the day I was born. I'll continue to do so without your guidance." She left the room before her mother-in-law could respond, but she felt the woman's gaze burning into her back. The war was no longer subtle. It was open, deliberate, and escalating. Over the following weeks, the isolation deepened. Colleagues who used to seek Maria's input started bypassing her, going directly to her husband instead. Meetings were scheduled without her knowledge. Emails she should have been copied on went to others. When she asked about it, she was told she needed to rest, that they didn't want to burden her, that her health was more important than any deal. But Maria knew better. This wasn't about her health. This was about erasing her, making her invisible, ensuring that by the time she gave birth, she'd be so far removed from the company's operations that coming back would be impossible. So she adapted. She started documenting everything. Every deal she closed, every strategy she developed, every contribution she made, she recorded meticulously in a private file on her laptop. Not for revenge, not to prove anything to anyone else, but to remind herself of the truth when everyone around her was trying to rewrite it. She worked from home more often now, partly because the office had become hostile territory, partly because her body demanded rest. But even at home, she wasn't safe from the psychological assault. Her mother-in-law would visit unannounced, always with some excuse, bringing groceries, checking on her health, offering unsolicited advice about pregnancy and motherhood. "You know, dear, when I was pregnant, I stopped working entirely," she said one afternoon, sitting in Maria's living room uninvited. "I focused on preparing for my son's arrival. It was the best decision I ever made." Maria looked up from her laptop where she'd been reviewing contracts. "I'm not you." Her mother-in-law's smile was patient, condescending. "No, you're not. But you're carrying my grandchildren. And I have a responsibility to ensure they're born healthy, which means ensuring their mother isn't stressed and overworked." Maria closed her laptop slowly. "Are you suggesting I'm a bad mother before my children are even born?" Her mother-in-law's expression shifted to shock, perfectly performed. "Of course not. How could you think such a thing? I'm only trying to help. But Maria saw through it. Every comment, every visit, every piece of advice was designed to undermine her confidence, to make her question herself, to isolate her further from her husband and from any support system she might have had. That evening, when her husband came home, his mother was still there. They sat together in the living room, talking in low voices, occasionally glancing toward the bedroom where Maria had retreated. She could hear fragments of their conversation through the door. She's becoming difficult, so defensive. I'm worried about her mental state. Pregnancy can do strange things to a woman's mind. Maria pressed her hands against her ears, but the words seeped through anyway. This was the strategy. Make her seem unstable. Make her reactions look irrational. Make everyone believe she was the problem. When her husband finally came to bed hours later, Maria pretended to be asleep. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, and she could feel his uncertainty, his confusion. He was being torn between two versions of reality. His mother's carefully constructed narrative and his own fading memories of who Maria actually was. Which version would win? The question haunted Maria as she lay there in the dark, twins moving restlessly inside her, her marriage crumbling around her, and no way to fight back without confirming every terrible thing being said about her. Endurance, she reminded herself, was her only weapon now. Silence was her shield. And somewhere deep inside, she held onto the truth, even as everyone around her tried to bury it. Even as the personal pressures intensified, Maria's professional brilliance could not be dimmed. At 7 months pregnant, carrying twins that made every movement deliberate and exhausting, she spearheaded the largest deal the family company had ever attempted, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition with global implications. The target was Meridian Technologies, a European firm with cutting-edge patents and distribution networks that could triple the company's international presence. 3 competitors were circling the same opportunity, each with deeper pockets and stronger political connections. But Maria had something they didn't. She had vision, and she had desperation. This deal wasn't just about business anymore. It was about survival. If she could close this, if she could prove her worth beyond any doubt, maybe her husband would finally see what his mother was doing. Maybe the fog of manipulation would lift. Maybe she could reclaim the marriage she'd once had. So she worked. Through morning sickness that still plagued her. Through swollen ankles and back pain that made sitting at her desk an act of endurance. Through sleepless nights when the twins would kick and turn, as if they too sensed the urgency of what their mother was fighting for. The negotiation had begun 4 months earlier, before anyone knew about the pregnancy, before the isolation had become complete. Maria had initiated contact with Meridian's CEO, a notoriously difficult man named Henrik Voss, who'd rejected every previous approach. She'd spent weeks studying not just his company, but the man himself, his speeches, his interviews, his business philosophy. She learned he valued substance over flash, strategy over charm, and honesty over flattery. So when she finally secured a video call with him, she didn't waste time on pleasantries. Mr. Voss, I'm not here to convince you we're the best option. I'm here to show you we're the only option that makes sense. He'd raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Bold statement. Back it up. For the next hour, Maria walked him through a presentation she'd built entirely herself, outlining how the acquisition would preserve his company's independence while expanding its reach, how the financial structure would protect his employees, and how the timeline would give him control over the transition. She anticipated every objection before he raised it. She addressed every concern before he voiced it. By the end of the call, Voss was leaning forward, his skepticism replaced by genuine interest. Send me the full proposal, he said, and we'll talk again next week. Over the following months, Maria navigated the deal with surgical precision. Every meeting, every document, every negotiation point was handled with meticulous care. Her team, initially skeptical of her ability to manage such a massive undertaking while pregnant, quickly realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. One afternoon, during a particularly tense negotiation session held via video conference, Meridian's legal team raised an unexpected concern about intellectual property rights. The room fell silent. Maria's colleagues exchanged worried glances. This was the kind of issue that could derail weeks of progress. But Maria didn't panic. She'd anticipated this exact scenario 3 weeks earlier and had already prepared a solution. "If you look at Appendix 7, Section 4, she said calmly, pulling up the document on screen, you'll see we've structured the IP rights to remain with Meridian's original development team, with licensing agreements that protect your innovations while allowing collaborative development. This isn't an acquisition of your ideas. It's a partnership that amplifies them." The room on the other side of the screen went quiet. Then Voss laughed, a genuine sound of appreciation. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" Maria allowed herself a small smile. "That's my job." But even as she closed in on the deal, the sabotage continued at home. Her mother-in-law, recognizing that Maria's success threatened her carefully constructed narrative, escalated her campaign. She began attending company meetings she'd never shown interest in before, offering opinions that subtly undermined Maria's strategies. "It's such an ambitious deal," she'd say to board members. "I just hope Maria isn't overextending herself. Pregnancy can affect judgment, you know, hormones and all." One board member, an older executive named Gerald who'd worked with the family for decades, actually pulled Maria aside after one such meeting. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. "Your mother-in-law seems worried about you." Maria felt the trap closing. If she defended herself, she'd seem defensive. If she dismissed the concerns, she'd seem reckless. So she chose her words carefully. "I appreciate her concern, but I assure you, this deal is solid. Every projection, every risk assessment, every contingency plan has been reviewed multiple times. My pregnancy doesn't affect my ability to read a balance sheet or negotiate terms." Gerald nodded, but she could see the doubt in his eyes. The seed had been planted. How do you fight someone who poisons your reputation while pretending to care about your well-being? 2 weeks before the deal was set to close, Maria woke up at 3 in the morning with sharp pains in her abdomen. Panic seized her immediately. The twins. Something was wrong. She shook her husband awake, her voice tight with fear. "I need to go to the hospital. Now." He was alert instantly, helping her to the car, his hand steady even as his face showed worry. At the emergency room, doctors examined her thoroughly, monitoring the baby's heartbeats, checking for complications. After 2 hours that felt like days, the doctor came back with news. "The babies are fine," she said, "but you're experiencing stress-related contractions. Not labor, but your body's warning system. You need to reduce stress immediately, or you risk premature delivery." Maria closed her eyes, relief and frustration washing over her in equal measure. The doctor continued, her tone gentle but firm. "I'm recommending modified bed rest. No travel. Limited work hours. Your body is telling you it's reached its limit." Maria's husband took her hand. "You need to step back from the Meridian deal," he said quietly. She turned to him, seeing genuine concern in his eyes, but also something else. Relief. As if this medical crisis had given him permission to finally say what his mother had been suggesting for months. "I can't," Maria said. "We're 2 weeks from closing. If I step back now, Voss will see it as instability. He'll walk away." Her husband shook his head. "Then let him walk away. Your health, our children, they're more important than any deal." Maria wanted to scream, wanted to tell him that this wasn't about the deal, that this was about everything his mother had stolen from her, every achievement she'd had to fight twice as hard for, every moment of her competence being questioned. But she was too exhausted, too drained. So she simply said, "I'll work from home. I'll rest. But I'm finishing this." He didn't argue further, but the tension between them was palpable during the silent drive home. Over the next 2 weeks, Maria worked from her bed, laptop balanced on her swollen belly, phone pressed to her ear during conference calls that lasted hours. Her team brought documents to the house. Video conferences replaced in-person meetings. And slowly, painfully, the deal came together. The final negotiation happened on a Tuesday morning. Maria, propped up by pillows, her ankle swollen and her back aching, faced Henrik Voss one last time via video. We've addressed every concern, she said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. The only question left is whether you trust us to honor our commitments. Voss was quiet for a long moment, studying her through the screen. Then he said something that caught her off guard. You know, Mrs. Martinez, when we started this process, I had my doubts. Not about your company, but about whether anyone had the fortitude to see this through. You've proven me wrong. Not just with your strategy, but with your character. This deal is closed. Relief flooded through Maria, so intensely she felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you, she managed. You won't regret this. When the call ended, Maria sat alone in her bedroom, one hand on her laptop, the other on her belly. She'd done it. Against every obstacle, every act of sabotage, every moment of isolation and doubt, she'd closed the biggest deal in the company's history. This was her vindication, her proof. Her undeniable worth is documented in contracts and signatures and billions of dollars. But when her husband came home that evening and she told him the news, his reaction wasn't what she'd hoped for. That's great, he said, but his voice was flat. I'm proud of you. The words fell hollow, obligatory, as if he was reading from a script his mother had written. The board wants to host a gala dinner to celebrate, he continued. Next Saturday. It'll be a big event. Investors, press, everyone. Maria felt a spark of hope. A public celebration. Recognition. Finally, her work would be acknowledged in front of everyone who mattered. That sounds perfect, she said. Her husband nodded, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. My mother's organizing it. She wants it to be special. And there it was. The warning bell that Maria should have heard louder. Her mother-in-law, organizing a celebration of Maria's achievement. But Maria was too tired, too relieved, too desperate for validation to question it. She convinced herself that maybe this was the turning point. Maybe her mother-in-law had finally accepted her. Maybe closing this deal had earned her the respect she'd been fighting for. She spent the next week preparing, choosing a modest but elegant maternity dress, practicing what she might say if asked to speak, allowing herself to imagine a moment where her worth was finally, publicly, undeniably recognized. She had no idea she was walking into a trap, that the gala wasn't designed to celebrate her. It was designed to destroy her. And everyone she trusted had been complicit in building it. When Saturday arrived, Maria dressed carefully, her hands trembling slightly with a mixture of anticipation and exhaustion. She looked at herself in the mirror, 8 months pregnant, carrying twins who would arrive in just weeks, having just closed the biggest deal of her career. You did this, she whispered to her reflection. No matter what happens next, you did this. She had no idea how prophetic those words would be, or how much she would need to remember them when everything fell apart. The night of the gala arrived with a deceptive beauty. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the grand ballroom, their reflections dancing on polished marble floors that gleamed like mirrors. Round tables draped in ivory silk filled the space, each set with fine china and crystal glasses that caught the light with every movement. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music elegant and understated. Cameras had been positioned strategically throughout the room, capturing every angle, every guest, every moment. This was meant to be a celebration, a recognition of the Meridian deal that would reshape the company's future. But as Maria entered the ballroom on her husband's arm, 8 months pregnant and radiant despite her exhaustion, she felt something in the air that made her instincts scream. The smiles were too practiced. The whispers are too deliberate. Her mother-in-law stood near the entrance, greeting guests with gracious warmth. But when her eyes landed on Maria, something cold flickered beneath the polished surface. Maria, dear, she said, her voice carrying across the space. How wonderful that you could make it. Though I do hope you won't tire yourself. Perhaps you should sit down immediately. The concern sounded genuine to anyone listening. But Maria heard the subtext. You don't belong standing. You're too weak to be here. You should disappear. Maria smiled, her hand resting protectively on her belly. I'm fine, thank you. I wouldn't miss this for anything. Her mother-in-law's smile tightened imperceptibly. Of course. Though do let me know if you need anything. We certainly don't want any incidents." The word hung in the air like a threat. Maria moved into the ballroom, her husband's hand barely touching her back, a gesture that felt more like obligation than support. Guests approached them, offering congratulations, though Maria noticed most directed their comments to her husband. "Brilliant work on the Meridian deal," one investor said, shaking his hand enthusiastically. "You've secured the company's future for decades." Maria waited for her husband to correct him, to acknowledge her role. But he simply smiled and said, "Thank you." It was a team effort. A team effort. As if Maria's months of sleepless nights, strategic brilliance, and relentless negotiation were just background noise in someone else's symphony. She felt something crack inside her chest, but she kept smiling, kept nodding, kept playing the role of the supportive wife, because what else could she do? Throughout dinner, the pattern continued. Executives praised her husband's vision. Board members toasted his leadership. Colleagues congratulated him on his strategic acumen. And Maria sat beside him, invisible, her contribution to the biggest deal in company history erased with surgical precision. Then, as dessert was being served, her mother-in-law stood and made her way to the microphone positioned at the front of the room. The string quartet fell silent. Conversations dimmed. Every eye in the room turned toward her. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice warm and commanding. "I want to thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate a momentous achievement for our company." Applause rippled through the room. Maria's hands remained in her lap, her heart beginning to race with an anxiety she couldn't name. Her mother-in-law continued, her tone measured and practiced. "The Meridian acquisition represents years of strategic planning, careful negotiation, and bold vision. It's a testament to the leadership that has guided this company through challenging times." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room before landing deliberately on Maria. "But tonight, I think it's important we address something that's been on my mind. Something about integrity, about truth, and about the values that define our family and our business." The room went completely silent. Maria felt her husband shift beside her, confusion and concern flickering across his face. What was happening? Her mother-in-law's expression remained pleasant, but her next words were delivered with the precision of a blade. "You see, success in business requires not just intelligence, but character. It requires humility, and it requires understanding one's true place in the larger picture." Maria's stomach dropped. This wasn't a celebration. This was an execution. "When someone joins our family," her mother-in-law continued, her voice growing slightly harder, "we welcome them with open arms. We provide opportunities, resources, and support. We ask only for honesty and gratitude in return." She paused, letting the words settle over the room like fog. But sometimes people forget where they came from. They forget the help they received. They begin to believe their own narratives, taking credit for achievements that were truly collaborative efforts. The implication was clear. Maria felt every eye in the room turn toward her, felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her from all sides. Her mother-in-law wasn't finished. "Maria came to us from very humble beginnings. A village most of us have never heard of. Parents who worked with their hands. No connections, no resources, no understanding of our world." The words were delivered with false sympathy, but each one landed like a hammer. We embraced her. We gave her opportunities she never could have accessed on her own. My son married her out of love. Yes, but also out of a generous spirit that saw potential where others might have seen only limitations. Maria's hands clenched in her lap, her nails digging into her palms. Around her, guests shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others watching with the morbid fascination of people witnessing a public spectacle. "The Meridian deal," her mother-in-law said, her voice rising slightly, "was indeed a success. But let's be clear about who made it happen. My son led those negotiations. His team supported him. And yes, Maria was involved, as any good wife would be, offering assistance where she could. But to claim, as I've heard some suggest, that she was the architect of this achievement." She shook her head slowly, sadly. "That would be dishonest. That would be taking credit that isn't rightfully hers. The room erupted in whispers. Maria felt the ground shifting beneath her, felt her reality being rewritten in real time in front of 50 witnesses who would carry this narrative into every business circle that mattered. Her husband sat frozen beside her, his face pale, his expression unreadable. Why wasn't he stopping this? Why wasn't he standing up, correcting his mother, defending the truth? Maria started to rise, started to speak, but her mother-in-law's voice cut through the chaos. Maria, dear, I know this must be difficult to hear. Pregnancy makes us emotional, makes us perhaps see things in ways that aren't quite accurate. And I want you to know we still care about you. We still want what's best for those babies you're carrying. The false compassion was the cruelest cut of all. Maria's voice, when she finally found it, came out quieter than she intended. That's not true, she said, but the words were swallowed by the enormous room, by the whispers, by the sheer force of her mother-in-law's orchestrated assault. Her mother-in-law continued as if Maria hadn't spoken. I think, for everyone's sake, it would be best if Maria took some time away, to rest, to prepare for motherhood, to reflect on what truly matters. Then she turned to her son, her expression shifting to something that looked almost like concern. Don't you agree? And in that moment, Maria's husband, the man she'd loved, the man whose children she carried, the man who'd once admired her brilliance, looked at her with eyes that held doubt, confusion, and worst of all, embarrassment. He stood slowly, his movements mechanical, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the silent room. I think my mother is right. Maria, you should go home. You're clearly not well. The words shattered what was left of Maria's composure. Not well. As if her objection to being publicly humiliated was a symptom of instability rather than a justified response to cruelty. She looked around the room, searching for one face, one ally, one person who would speak up for truth. But she found only averted eyes and uncomfortable silence. People who'd praised her work in private now refused to meet her gaze. Colleagues who'd relied on her expertise suddenly found their phones fascinating. Even the executives who'd watched her close the Meridian deal remained silent, unwilling to contradict the family that controlled their careers. Maria stood, her movements slow and deliberate despite the trembling in her legs. She would not cry. She would not give them that satisfaction. She placed one hand on her belly, feeling the twins move restlessly inside her, as if they too sensed their mother's anguish. I closed that deal, she said, her voice stronger now, carrying across the room with quiet authority. I negotiated every term. I built every strategy. I spent months earning Henrik Voss's trust when everyone else had failed. And you all know it. Her mother-in-law's expression hardened. Maria, you're making a scene. Think of the babies. Think of your husband's reputation. Maria met her gaze directly, seeing clearly for the first time the depth of hatred beneath the polished exterior. This woman had never intended to accept her, had never planned to let her belong, had orchestrated this moment for months, planting seeds of doubt, stealing credit, poisoning her husband's perception, all leading to this public execution. I'm thinking very clearly, Maria said, clearer than I have in months. She turned to her husband, searching his face for some sign of the man she'd married. Are you going to let this happen? Are you going to let her erase everything I've done? Everything I am? He looked away. That was his answer. In front of 50 witnesses, cameras still rolling, investors and colleagues watching, he looked away. His mother's voice cut through the tension one final time. Someone escort Maria out. She needs rest. And just like that, it was over. Two security guards approached, their expressions apologetic but firm. Maria didn't resist. She walked toward the exit with her head high, her dignity intact even as her heart shattered, even as her marriage crumbled, even as her professional reputation was destroyed by lies told with practiced ease. The doors of the ballroom were heavy, ornate things that required both guards to pull them open. As Maria stepped through, 8 months pregnant, publicly humiliated, discarded the moment her usefulness ended, she heard the whispers resume behind her. Speculation, judgment, the narrative being solidified. Poor, unstable Maria, claiming credit she didn't deserve, suffering from pregnancy-induced delusions, thankfully removed before she embarrassed herself further. The doors began to close behind her, sealing her out of the world she'd fought so hard to be part of. But just as they were about to shut completely, a sound cut through the night air. The soft, unmistakable hum of an expensive engine. A Bentley, black and gleaming, pulling up to the entrance with a precision that suggested the driver knew exactly what was happening inside. The doors stopped mid-swing. Maria turned, her heart racing for reasons she couldn't explain. The Bentley's rear door opened, and a man stepped out. Elderly but not frail, dressed in an impeccable suit, moving with a kind of calm authority that needed no announcement. He looked at Maria, and something in his eyes, recognition, warmth, fury barely contained, made her breath catch. Then he walked past her, back toward the ballroom, and said in a voice that carried like thunder, "Keep those doors open. I'm not finished here." Inside the ballroom, her mother-in-law's triumph was about to turn to ash, because the man walking through those doors was about to change everything. And Maria, standing in the doorway between humiliation and vindication, had no idea that her nightmare was about to become someone else's. The elderly man walked into the ballroom with a presence that demanded attention without asking for it. The string quartet fell silent mid-note. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the servers froze, champagne bottles suspended in mid-pour. This wasn't the presence of wealth. Half the room was wealthier than most small countries. This was something different, something deeper. Moral authority, the kind that came from decades of building empires, not through manipulation, but through integrity. His suit was perfectly tailored, but understated. His shoes were expensive, but worn with the comfort of someone who didn't need to prove anything. His silver hair was combed back neatly, and his eyes, sharp, assessing, missing nothing, swept across the room with the calm judgment of a man who'd seen every game played and won most of them. Maria's mother-in-law, still standing at the microphone, stiffened visibly. Her practiced smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. She recognized him, and she was afraid. The man moved through the room deliberately, his gaze taking in the uncomfortable faces of guests who suddenly found their shoes fascinating, the cameras still positioned to capture everything, and finally Maria standing in the doorway, behind him, pregnant and humiliated, but still standing. When he reached the front of the room, he stopped directly in front of Maria's mother-in-law. The height difference was minimal, but somehow he seemed to tower over her. "I believe you're finished with that," he said quietly, gesturing to the microphone. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried effortlessly across the silent ballroom. Maria's mother-in-law's hand tightened on the microphone. "I'm sorry, but this is a private family event. I don't believe you were invited." The man's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "No, you're right. I wasn't invited to watch my granddaughter be humiliated in front of people who owe their careers to her brilliance. But I'm here now." The word hit the room like a physical force. "Granddaughter." Whispers exploded across the ballroom. Heads turned toward Maria, then back to the man, then to Maria's mother-in-law, whose face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "That's impossible," she said, but her voice wavered. "Maria has no family of significance. No connections. We checked." The man's smile was cold. "You checked what you could see. Birth certificates. Public records. The obvious things. What you didn't check, because you lack the imagination to consider it, is that some people choose to live quietly. Some people prefer to let their work speak rather than their name appearing in society pages." He took the microphone from her unresisting hand and turned to face the room. "My name is Robertson. Some of you may recognize it. Most of you won't, because I've spent the last 30 years deliberately staying out of the spotlight." A board member in the front row gasped audibly. An investor in the back stood up suddenly, his face shocked. The name meant something. To those who understood real power, it meant everything. "For those who don't know," Robert continued calmly, "I built Chin International from nothing 50 years ago. Sold it in 1998 for $8 billion. Since then, I focused on private investments, strategic acquisitions, and apparently, according to tonight's performance, remaining unaware of my own granddaughter's existence. He paused, letting that sink in. Until 3 months ago, when a colleague happened to mention a brilliant young strategist named Maria who'd closed the Meridian deal, who'd come from my hometown, whose mother's maiden name I recognized immediately. Maria felt her knees weaken. Her mother had never spoken about her own father, had always deflected questions with vague answers and sad smiles. Maria had assumed he was dead or absent or simply wanted nothing to do with them. She'd never imagined this. Her grandfather's voice continued, steady and relentless. I had investigators confirm what I suspected, that Maria is indeed my granddaughter, that her mother is my daughter, who left 30 years ago after a disagreement about her choice of husband, a good man who worked construction. A man I rejected because I was too proud, too concerned with status, too much like some people in this room. His gaze swept across the guests, and several looked away guiltily. I spent 3 decades regretting that decision. And when I learned about Maria, about her intelligence, her work ethic, her character, I began watching from a distance, observing, waiting to see if she'd want to know me, if she'd earned the right to inherit what I'd built. He turned to look directly at Maria's mother-in-law, and what I witnessed was a systematic campaign to destroy her. Not physically, not obviously, but psychologically. A campaign so carefully orchestrated that even her own husband couldn't see it for what it was. Maria's husband stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. That's not true. My mother was only concerned. Robert cut him off with a look. Concerned? Is that what you call taking credit for her deals? Erasing her contributions? Poisoning your perception of her with carefully placed doubts? Tell me, young man, who actually negotiated the Meridian acquisition. The question hung in the air. Maria's husband's mouth opened, then closed. His face flushed with the sudden realization of truth he'd been avoiding for months. We worked together. Robert's expression was almost pitiful. No, you didn't. Maria did 90% of that work. You know it. Your team knows it. Henrik Voss certainly knows it. He told me himself last week that he almost walked away 3 times, and each time it was Maria's strategic brilliance that brought him back. The room erupted in whispers again. An older executive, Gerald, who'd questioned Maria's judgment weeks earlier, stood up. If what you're saying is true, Robert turned toward him, his voice hardening. Do you doubt me? I have emails, recorded calls, documented contributions. I've spent 3 months gathering evidence, while I watched my granddaughter be dismantled piece by people who should have been supporting her. He pulled a tablet from his assistant, who'd appeared silently beside him, and with a few taps, the ballroom's projection screens flickered to life. Emails appeared, time-stamped documents, video conference recordings, all showing Maria's work on the Meridian deal, her strategies, her negotiations, her solutions to problems that had stumped everyone else. The evidence was undeniable, overwhelming, and damning. Maria's mother-in-law tried to speak, her voice shrill. This is absurd. Those documents could be fabricated. You can't just walk in here, and Robert turned to her, and his voice, though quiet, carried the weight of absolute authority. I'm not finished. Because, you see, the Meridian deal isn't the only lie you've been living. He tapped the tablet again, and new information appeared on the screens. Corporate documents, ownership papers, legal agreements that made several board members lean forward, squinting at the details. This company, Robert said, his voice carrying across the stunned silence, the one you've been running like your personal kingdom, doesn't actually belong to you. It belongs to me. The ballroom exploded. Guests stood, some shouting questions, others demanding explanations. Board members stared at the screens in disbelief. Maria's mother-in-law stumbled backward, her hand reaching for a chair to steady herself. That's impossible, she whispered. My late husband built this company. It's been in our family for... Robert's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Your late husband built this company with my money, with a loan he took 30 years ago when I was still speaking to my daughter. A loan that was never repaid. A loan that, according to the contract he signed, gave me controlling interest if payment wasn't made within 25 years. He paused, letting the timeline sink in. That deadline passed 3 years ago. I've owned this company for 3 years. The house you live in, the cars you drive, the lifestyle you flaunt, all of it exists because I allowed it to. Because I was waiting to see if you were worthy of the responsibility. Maria's husband looked like he'd been struck. My father never mentioned any loan. There's nothing in his records. Robert's expression was almost sympathetic. Your father kept many secrets, and your mother has been very careful to hide the truth. But the documents are all legal, all registered, all undeniable. I am the majority owner of this company, and as of tonight, I'm taking active control. The room fell into stunned silence. 50 witnesses, multiple cameras, and the entire foundation of their understanding of power and ownership crumbling in real time. Maria's mother-in-law seemed to age 10 years in 10 seconds. Her carefully constructed world, her authority, her control, all of it had been built on sand, and the tide had just come in. Robert turned back toward Maria, still standing in the doorway, her hand on her belly, tears streaming down her face, though she made no sound. Come here, granddaughter, he said gently. Maria moved forward on shaking legs, the crowd parting before her like water. When she reached her grandfather, he took her hand with a gentleness that contrasted everything that had come before. I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner, he said quietly. I'm sorry you had to endure this alone, but you're not alone anymore. He turned back to the room, his voice returning to steel. Effective immediately, there will be changes. The board will be restructured. Credit will be given where credit is due. And those who participated in the systematic humiliation of my granddaughter will answer for it. His gaze landed on Maria's mother-in-law. You will vacate the family home by the end of the month. You will relinquish all titles and positions within the company. And you will be grateful I'm not pursuing legal action for fraud and embezzlement. She opened her mouth to protest, but no sound came out. What could she say? The evidence was on screens behind her. The witnesses surrounded her. The man who actually owned everything she claimed as hers stood before her, immovable and absolute. Robert's final words were delivered with quiet finality. This gala was meant to humiliate Maria. Instead, it will be remembered as the night truth returned to this company. The night accountability replaced manipulation. The night my granddaughter was finally given what she'd earned. He looked around the room one last time. I suggest you all consider carefully what role you played in tonight's events, and what role you want to play moving forward. Then he took Maria's arm gently and led her toward the exit. Behind them, the ballroom remained frozen in shocked silence. 50 people who'd watched a woman be destroyed were now watching her grandfather dismantle an empire built on lies. And every single one of them was wondering the same thing. How did we not see this coming? How long had he been watching? And what happens now? The night of humiliation had become something else entirely. A reckoning. And it was far from over. Robertson didn't leave the ballroom immediately. Instead, he guided Maria to a chair at the front table, ensuring she was seated comfortably before turning back to address the frozen crowd. His assistant, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, had already set up a laptop connected to the projection screens. What came next would strip away every remaining layer of deception, leaving nowhere for the guilty to hide. I know you're all in shock, Robert said, his voice measured. But we're not finished. Because what happened tonight wasn't spontaneous cruelty. It was the culmination of months of calculated sabotage. And I have proof of every single step. He nodded to his assistant, and the screens flickered to life again. This time, they showed emails. Dozens of them. The first was dated 8 months earlier, 2 weeks after Maria's wedding. From Maria's mother-in-law to the head of human resources. Please ensure all project credits for Maria Martinez are listed under team contributions rather than individual achievements. We want to emphasize collaborative success. The next email was to the CFO. When preparing quarterly reports, highlight my son's leadership in closing deals. Maria's involvement should be noted as support staff. Then another, this one to a board member. I'm concerned about Maria's emotional stability. Pregnancy can affect judgment. Perhaps we should limit her access to critical decisions. Each email appeared on screen with timestamps, recipients, and context. Each one revealed a systematic effort to erase Maria's contributions while appearing concerned for her well-being. The room watched in horrified silence as the evidence mounted. Gerald, the executive who'd questioned Maria weeks earlier, stood abruptly. I received that email, he said, his voice shaking. I thought it came from genuine concern. I had no idea it was part of a larger pattern. Robert's gaze was unforgiving. Ignorance isn't innocence, Gerald. You chose to believe negative assumptions about a woman who'd proven her competence repeatedly. That says more about your biases than her capabilities. Gerald sat down heavily, his face ashen. But Robert wasn't done. The next screen showed financial records. Company accounts with irregular transfers. Bonuses paid to executives for deals they hadn't closed. Credit given to teams that hadn't existed. And in every case, the real work had been done by Maria, while others collected rewards. This, Robert said, gesturing to the screen, is institutional theft. Not of money, though that happened too, but of recognition, credibility, and professional identity. My granddaughter closed 7 major deals in the past year. 7. Do you know how many were publicly attributed to her? He paused. 0. A female executive in the back, someone Maria had worked with closely, raised her hand tentatively. Mr. Chun, I want to apologize. I knew Maria did most of the work on the Singapore expansion. I should have said something. Robert's expression softened slightly. Then say it now, publicly. Let's start rebuilding truth with honesty. The woman stood, her voice stronger now. Maria designed the entire Singapore strategy. She identified the market gaps, negotiated with local partners, and structured the deal to minimize regulatory risks. I signed the documents, but it was her work. Completely. Another voice joined from across the room. A junior analyst. The Bergman deal too. Maria spent 3 weeks analyzing their financial vulnerabilities. When they tried to back out, she knew exactly which pressure points to use because she'd done the research no one else bothered with. One by one, voices began to rise. Colleagues who'd stayed silent out of fear or career preservation now spoke up, each testimony adding weight to the undeniable truth. Maria had been the engine driving the company's success, while credit flowed upward to those who'd contributed nothing but their names. Maria's husband stood frozen, watching his understanding of reality crumble with each revelation. He turned toward his mother, his voice barely audible. Did you do this? All of it. His mother's face was a mask of composure fighting against collapse. I was protecting you, protecting our family's reputation. She was taking credit that should have been yours. You're my son, you deserve. Robert's voice cut through her justification like a blade. He deserves nothing he didn't earn. And neither do you. He nodded to his assistant again, and a new document appeared on screen. This one made several people gasp audibly. It was a contract between Maria's mother-in-law and a rival company, dated 6 weeks earlier. The terms were clear. In exchange for insider information about the Meridian deal, she would receive a consulting position and substantial compensation once the rival company successfully poached the acquisition. He didn't just sabotage Maria, Robert said, his voice colder than before. You betrayed your own company. You sold confidential information to competitors. That's corporate espionage. That's criminal. Maria's mother-in-law stumbled backward, her hand gripping the edge of the table. That's not what it looks like. They approached me. I was gathering intelligence on them, not. Robert's laugh was harsh and brief. Don't insult everyone's intelligence further. The paper trail is clear. You provided them with Maria's strategic documents, her negotiation notes, her risk assessments. Everything she'd worked months to develop, you handed to the enemy for money and a title. The room exploded in outrage. Board members were shouting. Investors were pulling out phones to call lawyers. The carefully orchestrated gala had become a public trial, and the verdict was unanimous. But Robert raised his hand for silence, and somehow, impossibly, the room obeyed. "There's one more thing," he said quietly. "Something I think Maria should hear, directly." He turned to face his granddaughter, his expression softening with something that looked like pain and pride mixed together. "3 months ago, when I first learned about you, I didn't just start investigating the company. I investigated your life, your marriage, your struggles, and I discovered something that I think you've been too loyal to see clearly." He gestured to the screen, and a new video appeared. Security footage from the family home, dated 2 months earlier. Maria's husband and his mother, sitting in the study, having a conversation they thought was private. The audio was clear. "She's becoming impossible to control," Maria's mother said. "The pregnancy was supposed to slow her down, but she's working harder than ever." Her son's voice responded, tired but complicit. "What do you want me to do?" His mother's answer was chilling. "Make her doubt herself. Question her decisions. Remind her that her background makes her unsuitable for this world. Slowly, gently, until she withdraws on her own." There was a pause, then her son's voice, quieter. "That feels cruel." His mother's response was immediate. "It's necessary. She doesn't belong here. She never did. And the longer she stays, the more damage she does to your reputation, to our family name." The video continued, showing multiple conversations over several weeks. Each one revealed Maria's husband participating in the campaign against her, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes with frustration, but always complicit. He questioned her judgment in front of colleagues. He suggested she was overreacting to his mother's behavior. He isolated her from potential allies by framing her as difficult and emotionally unstable. Maria watched the screen, her hand pressed against her mouth, tears streaming silently down her face. This wasn't just betrayal. This was premeditated destruction by the person she'd trusted most. When the video ended, the ballroom was silent except for Maria's quiet crying. Her husband stood motionless, his face drained of color, unable to meet her eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't realize. I thought I was helping you. I thought." Maria's voice, when she finally spoke, was steady despite her tears. "You thought your mother's version of me was more real than the woman you married. You chose her lies over my truth, over and over again." He took a step toward her, but Robert moved between them, his presence a wall. "You don't get to approach her right now. You've lost that right." He turned to address the entire room one final time. "What you witnessed tonight is what happens when cruelty operates in whispers, when power is abused behind closed doors, when good people stay silent because speaking up feels too risky." His gaze swept across every face, holding each person accountable. "This company will change. Not just management, but culture. Those who participated in or enabled this abuse will face consequences. Those who stayed silent will need to decide if they have the courage to speak up next time. Because there will be a next time. There's always a next time." He helped Maria to her feet, his arms supporting her as exhaustion and emotional devastation threatened to overwhelm her. "We're leaving now," he said. "My lawyers will be in touch with all relevant parties. The board meeting is scheduled for Monday morning. Attendance is mandatory." As Robert guided Maria toward the exit, a voice called out from the crowd. Henrik Voss, the CEO of Meridian Technologies, had been sitting quietly in the back, observing everything. He stood now, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Chun, if I may." Robert stopped, turning. Voss walked forward, his gaze fixed on Maria. "I came tonight because I was told this gala was to honor the Meridian deal. Instead, I watched attempted character assassination." He pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then looked at Maria directly. "I'm sending you something. An email I received 4 weeks ago from Mrs. Martinez's mother-in-law, suggesting that the deal was unstable because you were emotionally compromised by pregnancy. She recommended I consider renegotiating with more stable leadership." The room went dead silent. Voss continued, his voice hard. "I ignored it because I'm not an idiot. I know exactly who I negotiated with. I know who earned my respect. And it certainly wasn't anyone in this family except Maria. He turned to the crowd. For the record, and I hope those cameras are still recording, the Meridian acquisition happened because of Maria Martinez's strategic brilliance, her integrity, and her relentless work ethic. Anyone who tells you differently is either ignorant or lying. With that, he nodded to Maria and walked out. His testimony, from someone with no stake in the family drama, carried the weight of objective truth. One by one, other allies began to emerge. A junior executive who'd watched Maria work late nights while heavily pregnant. A secretary who'd seen the emails being sent behind Maria's back. An investor who'd noticed the pattern of credit being stolen. Each voice added to the mountain of evidence that Maria had been systematically destroyed by people who should have protected her. Maria's mother-in-law, seeing her carefully constructed world collapsing completely, made one last desperate attempt. "This is all because of him," she said, pointing at Robert. "He's manipulating you all. He wants to take control of my family's company using his granddaughter as an excuse." Robert's smile was cold. "Your family's company? You mean my company that I allowed your husband to run? The company I funded, I built, I own." He pulled out a document, the original loan agreement, signed and notarized 30 years earlier. "This isn't manipulation. This is accountability, something you've avoided your entire life." He handed the document to a board member in the front row. "Verify it if you want. Call my lawyers. Check the records. But we both know what you'll find." The board member scanned the document, his eyes widening. He looked up at Maria's mother-in-law with undisguised contempt. "It's legitimate. Every word he said is true." And with that, the last pillar supporting her illusion of power crumbled. She collapsed into a chair, her perfect posture finally breaking, her mask of control shattered beyond repair. Robert took Maria's arm again. "We're done here. Maria needs rest, and these people need to reflect on their complicity." As they walked out, the ballroom behind them erupted in chaos. Shouting, accusations, desperate attempts to distance themselves from the woman who'd orchestrated everything. But Maria didn't look back. She'd spent months enduring, months staying silent, months letting her work speak. And now, finally, the truth had spoken louder than any of them. The question that lingered wasn't about guilt. That had been proven beyond doubt. The question was about consequences. What happens when the powerful are exposed? When lies are replaced with evidence? When silence is finally broken? The answer was unfolding in real time, captured by cameras that would ensure this night was never forgotten. And Maria, walking out of her nightmare supported by a grandfather she'd never known, was about to discover that vindication, while satisfying, was only the beginning of her real journey. Robert Chen's car pulled away from the gala, leaving behind a ballroom full of chaos, shattered reputations, and people scrambling to rewrite their roles in the night's events. But inside the Bentley, silence reigned. Not the oppressive silence Maria had endured for months, but a different kind. Protective, peaceful, the kind of silence that came after a storm when the world was still catching its breath. Maria sat beside her grandfather, her hands resting on her belly where the twins moved restlessly, as if they too sensed the seismic shift in their mother's life. She hadn't spoken since they left the ballroom, hadn't cried, hadn't asked questions. She simply sat, breathing slowly, processing months of pain that had finally been validated in front of everyone who doubted her. Robert watched her carefully, his experienced eyes recognizing the signs of someone who'd learned to survive by going internal, by protecting the core of who they were when the outside world became unbearable. He'd seen it before, in soldiers returning from war, in business partners who'd been betrayed, in his own daughter 30 years ago, when he'd rejected her choice of husband. The weight of that regret sat heavy on him now. "You don't have to talk," he said quietly. "But I need you to know something. Your silence these past months wasn't a weakness. It was a strategy, and it worked." Maria turned to look at him, her eyes red but dry. "Did it?" "Because it felt like losing. Every single day." Robert nodded slowly. "I know it did. But think about what happened tonight. If you'd fought back earlier, if you'd confronted your mother-in-law publicly, if you'd demanded credit loudly, what would have happened? Maria considered this. They would have called me difficult, ungrateful, emotional. Exactly, Robert said. They would have used your reactions as proof that you were unstable. Your silence, your patience, your refusal to give them ammunition. That's what made tonight possible. Because when the truth finally came out, there was no way to dismiss it as your overreaction or your exaggeration. The evidence spoke. And you didn't have to. The car turned onto a tree-lined street, pulling up to a brownstone Maria had never seen before. Robert's home, she realized. Your mother lives here too, he said, reading her expression. Has for the past 5 years after your father passed. She didn't tell you because I asked her not to. I wanted to earn the right to meet you, not demand it because of blood. Maria's breath caught. My mother's here? Now. Robert nodded. She's been watching from a distance too, wanting to help but respecting my decision to wait. Tonight, I think we've all waited long enough. The front door opened before they reached it, and a woman stepped out. Older now, her hair streaked with gray. But Maria would have recognized her anywhere. Her mother. The woman who'd raised her alone after her father died, who'd worked the market stalls to put Maria through school, who taught her that dignity wasn't about where you came from, but how you carried yourself. Mama, Maria whispered, and then she was moving, as fast as her pregnant body would allow, into arms that had always meant safety. Her mother held her carefully, mindful of the belly between them, tears streaming down both their faces. I'm sorry, her mother said in Spanish, their private language. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I wanted to tell you about your grandfather, wanted to help, but he said. Maria pulled back, looking into her mother's eyes. Why didn't you tell me? All these years, I thought I had no one. Her mother's face crumpled with old pain. Because I was ashamed. When your grandfather rejected your father, rejected our marriage, because he thought we weren't good enough, I swore I'd never ask him for anything. Not money, not help, not even acknowledgement. I wanted to prove I could raise you, without his approval. Robert stood behind them, his voice heavy with regret. And you did. You raised an extraordinary daughter. But pride cost us all 30 years we can't get back. He looked at Maria. I was wrong. About your father. About what matters. About everything I thought defined worth. Your father was a better man than I'll ever be. He loved your mother completely. Worked himself to exhaustion to provide for you. And I threw that away because of numbers in a bank account. Maria felt the weight of generational pain, of pride and prejudice and lost time that couldn't be recovered. But she also felt something else. The possibility of healing, of choosing differently than those who came before. What happens now, she asked. Robert gestured toward the house. Now you rest. You're safe here. Your mother's been preparing a room for you and the twins. And tomorrow we will start fixing what's broken. Inside, the brownstone was warm and lived in, nothing like the cold mansion Maria had been slowly suffocating in. Family photos lined the walls. Pictures of her mother, of Maria as a child that her mother must have shared, of her father whose smile she'd inherited. This was a home, not a showcase. A place where people lived and loved and made mistakes and forgave each other. Her mother guided her to a bedroom that had been carefully prepared. A crib stood in the corner, already assembled. Baby clothes were folded neatly on a dresser. A rocking chair sat by the window. You did all this? Maria asked, her voice breaking. Her mother nodded. I've been preparing for months. Your grandfather told me about the twins, about what you were going through. Every day, I wanted to show up at that house and drag you out. But he said you needed to see it through yourself, that intervening too early would make things worse. She helped Maria sit on the bed. I hated every minute of waiting. But he was right. You needed proof, evidence. Not just a mother's word that you were being abused. Maria lay back against the pillows, exhaustion finally catching up with her. I don't know what to do. About my husband. About the company. About any of it. Her mother smoothed her hair, a gesture from childhood that still brought comfort. Tonight, you don't do anything. Tonight, you rest. Tomorrow we will make plans. As her mother left the room, Robert appeared in the doorway. May I? He asked, and Maria nodded. He sat in the rocking chair, looking older now than he had at the gala, the weight of the evening settling on him. I need to tell you something about your husband, he said carefully. Maria tensed. I saw the videos. I know what he did. Robert nodded. You saw him participate in your destruction. What you didn't see was the 3 times he almost stopped it. The moments when he questioned his mother's narrative. The nights he couldn't sleep because something felt wrong, but he couldn't articulate what. He leaned forward. I'm not excusing him. What he did was unforgivable, but I've spent months watching him be manipulated, and I recognize the pattern because I did the same thing to your mother 30 years ago. I let other people's prejudices override my own judgment. I chose comfort over truth. Maria's jaw tightened. Why are you telling me this? Robert's expression was painful. Because I want you to make a choice I didn't get to make. Your mother never gave me a chance to apologize, to make things right. She cut me off completely, and she was right to do it. But we lost 30 years because of my pride and her justified anger. I don't want that for you. He stood, moving toward the door. What your husband did was wrong. But whether he gets a chance to understand that, to change, to earn your forgiveness, that's your choice. Not mine. Not your mother's. Yours. And whatever you decide, I'll support it. After he left, Maria lay in the darkness, her hands on her belly, feeling the twins move. For months, she'd been so focused on survival that she hadn't let herself think about what came after. About forgiveness or consequences or the future. About whether love that had been poisoned could ever be cleansed. Her phone buzzed. 53 missed calls. 37 text messages. Most from her husband. She read one, I'm sorry. I know those words mean nothing right now, but I need you to know I finally see what I did. What I let happen. I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know the truth. Another, my mother is gone. Removed from the house by security. I should have done it months ago. I should have believed you. And another, I love you. I know I have no right to say that after tonight. But the twins deserve to know their father isn't the man you saw in those videos. Or maybe he is. Maybe that's exactly who I am. But I want to be better. I want to deserve you again. Maria set the phone down. Words were easy. Change was hard. And trust, once shattered, was nearly impossible to rebuild. But she'd spent months being silent, enduring, waiting. Maybe it was time to use her voice differently. Not to attack. Not to defend. But to set terms. To define what she would and wouldn't accept. To reclaim the power that had been slowly stolen from her. The next morning, Maria woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of her mother's cooking drifting up from the kitchen. For the first time in 8 months, she felt rested, protected, safe. Downstairs, Robert sat at the kitchen table with a laptop already working. Her mother was preparing breakfast, humming softly in Spanish. It was so ordinary, so normal, that Maria almost cried again. Good morning, Robert said, looking up. How did you sleep? Maria poured herself tea, her movements slow and careful. Better than I have in months. What happens at the board meeting tomorrow? Robert's expression was all business now. Complete restructuring. Your mother-in-law is out entirely. Her allies on the board are being investigated. And you are being offered the position of Chief Strategy Officer, with full credit for every deal you've closed. Maria sat down heavily. I don't know if I can go back there. Too many bad memories. Robert nodded. I understand. Which is why I'm also offering you an alternative. Walk away completely. I'll provide for you and the twins. You'll never have to work again if you don't want to. He paused. But I hope you don't choose that. Because the company needs someone with your integrity. And you've earned the right to succeed in the place that tried to destroy you. Maria sipped her tea, considering. Walking away would be easier. Starting over somewhere new. Somewhere without the weight of months of humiliation. But easier wasn't always better. And letting them win by leaving felt like the final surrender. I want to think about it, she said. Robert smiled. Take all the time you need. The company isn't going anywhere. Her phone buzzed again. Her husband. He's been calling every hour, her mother said quietly. He showed up here last night after you were asleep. Your grandfather sent him away. Maria looked at Robert. Did he seem sincere? Robert considered the question carefully. He seemed broken. Whether that's guilt or just embarrassment at being exposed, I can't say. Only time will tell. Maria thought about the man she'd married. The one who'd respected her intelligence before his mother had poisoned his mind. Was that man still in there somewhere? Or had he been an illusion all along? I'm going to see him, she said suddenly. Not at the house. Somewhere neutral. I need to hear his apology without his mother's voice in his head. I need to see if there's anything left worth saving. Her mother's hand tightened on her shoulder. Are you sure? You don't owe him anything. Maria met her mother's eyes. I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it for me. Because I need to know if I'm walking away from a marriage or from a lie. And I can't know that without giving him one chance to tell the truth. Robert nodded slowly. Then I'll arrange it. But I'm coming with you. Not in the room, but close enough to intervene if needed. Maria smiled, feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Agency. Control. The power to make decisions about her own life rather than simply enduring whatever was done to her. Her silence had protected her. But now it was time to speak. And this time, people would listen. Because she wasn't asking for permission anymore. She was setting terms. And anyone who didn't like it could leave. The woman who'd walked into that ballroom, humiliated and discarded, was gone. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who knew her worth. Someone who would never again let silence be mistaken for acceptance. What happens when a woman stops enduring and starts demanding? The answer was about to reshape everything. The conference room Robert had arranged was neutral territory, a private space in a downtown building neither Maria nor her husband had ever been to. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, the morning sun casting long shadows across the polished table that separated them. Maria arrived first, her grandfather and mother waiting in an adjacent room, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to give her space. She sat carefully, her hands resting on her belly where the twins had been particularly active all morning, as if they too sensed the importance of this moment. When her husband walked in, Maria almost didn't recognize him. The confident executive who'd stood beside his mother at the gala was gone. In his place was a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days, his eyes hollow, his expensive suit wrinkled, as if he'd worn it since that night. He stopped just inside the doorway, unsure if he had permission to come closer. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, his voice hoarse. "I wasn't sure you would." Maria gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit down." He moved carefully, like someone approaching a wounded animal, afraid any sudden movement might cause her to flee. When he sat, he couldn't see her eyes. "I don't know where to start," he said. Maria's voice was steady, emotionless. "Start with the truth. Not the version your mother told you. Not what you wished had happened. The actual truth about what you did to me." He flinched but nodded. "I let her destroy you. Not just allowed it, I participated in it. I told myself I was protecting you, that limiting your work was for your health, that questioning your judgment was concerning. But it was all a lie I told myself, because facing the truth meant admitting my mother was manipulating me. And admitting that meant I'd have to choose between you and her." Maria felt anger rise in her chest, hot and sharp. "And you chose her. Over and over again, you chose her." He finally looked up, tears streaming down his face. "I did. I'm not going to make excuses. I'm not going to blame manipulation or say I didn't know what I was doing. I knew. Maybe not consciously at first, but by the end, I knew. And I still did nothing." The admission hung between them, raw and undeniable. Maria waited, knowing there was more he needed to say, more truth that needed to be excavated, before any decision could be made. "When your grandfather showed those videos," he continued, his voice breaking, "I watched myself become someone I despise. I saw the moments when I could have stopped it, when I could have defended you, when I could have told my mother to leave us alone. And I chose comfort over courage. I chose my relationship with her over my marriage to you. He wiped his face roughly. The Meridian deal. I knew you'd done all the work. I watched you work through morning sickness, through exhaustion, through pain. And when it came time to present it, I stood up there and accepted congratulations like I'd earned them. I told myself it was for the company, that individual credit didn't matter. But that was another lie. Maria's hands clenched on the table. Do you know what it's like to watch your achievements be stolen? To work twice as hard as everyone else and receive half the recognition? To be erased piece by piece until you start doubting your own memory of what you did. Her voice rose slightly, emotion breaking through her control. I documented everything because I thought I was going crazy. Because everyone around me was telling a different story than the one I'd lived, and I needed proof that I wasn't imagining it. He was crying openly now. I'm sorry. I know those words are meaningless after what I did. But I'm so sorry. Maria leaned forward, her eyes blazing. Sorry doesn't rebuild trust. Sorry doesn't erase 8 months of systematic humiliation. Sorry doesn't change the fact that when it mattered most, when I needed you to believe in me, you believed her lies instead. She paused, breathing hard. Do you know what the worst part was? Not the stolen credit. Not even the public humiliation. It was watching you look at me with doubt in your eyes. Watching the man I loved slowly start to see me as a burden, as someone difficult and unreasonable, as a problem to be managed rather than a partner to be trusted. He reached across the table toward her, but she pulled back. Don't. You don't get to touch me yet. You don't get comfort while I'm still bleeding from wounds you helped create. He withdrew his hand, nodding. You're right. I don't deserve any of that. But I need you to know something. My mother is gone. Not just from the house, from my life. Completely. I've filed restraining orders. Changed all the locks. Terminated her access to company accounts. She will never be in a position to hurt you or our children again. Maria's laugh was bitter. You think removing her fixes this? The problem wasn't just her. It was you. Your willingness to believe the worst of me. Your silence when I needed you to speak up. Your choice to let her reshape how you saw me rather than trusting your own experience of who I am. She stood, pacing to the window, needing distance from his remorse that felt too little too late. I closed 7 major deals while pregnant with twins and battling constant sabotage. 7. Do you understand what that requires? Not just intelligence or work ethic, but the ability to compartmentalize pain, to function at the highest level while my personal life was being destroyed. And you watched all of it happen and did nothing. He stood too, but didn't approach. You're right about all of it. I failed you in every way that matters. And I don't expect you to forgive me, not now and maybe not ever. But I need you to know those videos your grandfather showed? They didn't just expose me to the world. They exposed me to myself, and I can't unsee what I've become. He moved to the window, standing several feet away, both of them looking out at the city below. I've spent 3 days replaying every moment. Every time I dismissed your concerns. Every time I took credit for your work. Every time I chose the easy lie over the difficult truth. And I realized something. My mother didn't turn me into someone new. She revealed who I'd always been underneath. Weak, eager for approval, more concerned with appearing successful than actually being decent. Maria turned to look at him, searching his face for signs of performance or genuine remorse. What she saw was exhaustion and something that might have been the beginning of actual self-awareness. So what do you want from me? She asked. Forgiveness? Permission to feel better about yourself? A chance to restart like none of this happened. He shook his head. I don't want anything. I'm not here to ask for a second chance. I'm here because you deserved an apology without an audience, without cameras, without my mother's influence. You deserve to hear me say, without excuses or justifications, that I destroyed our marriage through cowardice and complicity. He paused. And because our children deserve a father who understands what he did wrong, even if their mother decides he doesn't deserve to be part of their lives. Maria felt tears prick her eyes for the first time since entering the room. This was different from the gala, from the videos, from all the public drama. This was him, stripped of pretense, facing what he'd done without the safety net of his mother's manipulation to blame. But recognition of wrongdoing wasn't the same as change. Understanding wasn't the same as redemption. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to heal. Time to figure out who I am outside of survival mode. Time to prepare for the twins without also managing your redemption arc." He nodded. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here doing the work to become someone worthy of you, even if that person never gets another chance." Maria moved toward the door, then stopped. "One more thing. The company. Your grandfather offered me Chief Strategy Officer." He looked surprised. "That's incredible. You've earned it." Maria studied him. "He also offered me the option to walk away completely. Never work there again. Start fresh somewhere without the memories." She watched his reaction carefully. "What do you think I should do?" He was quiet for a long moment, clearly understanding this was a test. Finally, he said, "I think you should do whatever makes you feel most powerful. If staying and succeeding in the place that tried to destroy you gives you satisfaction, do it. If leaving and building something new without that weight brings you peace, do that. But don't make the decision based on me or anyone else. Make it based on what you need." It was the right answer. Maybe the first truly selfless thing he'd said in months. Maria opened the door, then looked back one final time. "I'm not saying yes to reconciliation. I'm not saying there's a path back to what we had. But I'm not saying no either. I'm saying prove it. Prove that what I saw today isn't performance. Prove that you're willing to do the hard work of becoming someone different. And maybe if you succeed, we can talk about whether there's anything left to rebuild." He nodded, fresh tears on his face. "Thank you. For this chance. For not giving up completely." Maria left without responding. In the adjacent room, her grandfather and mother stood waiting. "How did it go?" Robert asked. Maria considered the question. He admitted everything. No excuses. No blame shifting. Just acknowledgement of what he did. Her mother's expression was fierce. "And?" Maria smiled, tired but genuine. "And I told him I need time. That recognition isn't the same as change. That he has to prove he's different before we even discuss reconciliation." Robert nodded approvingly. "That's wisdom. Not letting anger close all doors, but not opening them prematurely either." They left the building together. Maria flanked by family she'd only just found, but who'd fought for her more fiercely than anyone. As they walked to the car, Maria felt something shift inside her. For months, she'd been in survival mode, enduring, documenting, waiting for vindication. The gala had provided that vindication. Her grandfather's intervention had restored her professional reputation. But this conversation had given her something else. Power. Not power over her husband. Power over her own life. The ability to set terms, to demand change, to decide on her own timeline what she would and wouldn't accept. She wasn't the woman who'd walked into that gala expecting celebration and receiving humiliation. She wasn't even the woman who'd left that gala supported by her grandfather. She was someone new. Someone who'd been tested and hadn't broken. Someone who'd endured cruelty and emerged with her integrity intact. Someone who understood that true strength wasn't about never being wounded, but about how you healed afterward. Later that evening, back at her grandfather's brownstone, Maria sat with her mother and grandfather around the dinner table. "I've decided," she said, "about the company." They waited. "I'm taking the Chief Strategy Officer position. Not because I want to prove anything to them. Because I want to prove something to myself. That I can succeed in the place that tried to break me. That my work speaks louder than any amount of sabotage. That women who come from nothing can stand in rooms full of inherited wealth and be undeniably, irrefutably brilliant." Robert raised his glass. To Maria, who never needed vindication because she never stopped being extraordinary. They drank, and Maria felt the weight of the past months begin to lift. Not disappear. Wounds this deep would take time to heal. But lighten. Become manageable. transform from a crushing burden into a story of survival that would make her stronger. The board meeting was tomorrow. The restructuring would begin. Her mother-in-law's allies would face consequences. And Maria would walk into that boardroom not as a victim seeking justice, but as a professional claiming her rightful place. The gala had been her public vindication. But this decision to stay, to succeed, to rise, was her private triumph. And somehow, that felt even more powerful. Because it wasn't about what others thought of her anymore. It was about what she knew about herself. And what she knew was this: she was unbreakable. Not because she'd never been broken, but because she'd learned to rebuild herself stronger every single time. Can a marriage survive betrayal this deep? Can trust be rebuilt from ruins? The answer would unfold over time. But tonight, Maria wasn't worried about answers. She was finally, peacefully, ready to ask the right questions. 3 weeks after the gala, on a quiet Tuesday morning, Maria went into labor. The twins, as if they'd been waiting for their mother to find solid ground before making their entrance. Arrived 2 weeks early, but healthy and strong. A boy and a girl. Perfect. Complete. The embodiment of everything Maria had endured to protect. Robert and her mother were in the waiting room when it happened, pacing anxiously despite the doctor's assurances that everything was progressing normally. When the nurse finally emerged to tell them Maria and the babies were doing well, Robert sat down heavily, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I missed so much," he said to his daughter. "With you. With Maria. I'm not missing any more." Maria's mother took his hand, and in that gesture was decades of pain beginning to heal. Forgiveness wasn't instant, but it was starting. In the recovery room, Maria held her babies with a fierce protectiveness that came from having fought for the right to bring them into a world where they'd be safe. The girl had Maria's dark eyes and serious expression. The boy had his father's features, but Maria's determined chin. They were hers. Irrefutably, completely hers. When the nurse asked if she wanted visitors, Maria hesitated. She knew who was waiting, who had been waiting for 3 weeks, calling daily, sending flowers she refused, leaving voicemails she didn't listen to. Her husband, the man who destroyed their marriage, but was supposedly trying to rebuild himself. "Not yet," Maria said quietly. "Give me time with them first." 2 hours later, after she'd nursed them both, after her mother had held each grandchild with tears of joy, after Robert had promised them everything he'd failed to give their mother, Maria finally said she was ready. Her husband entered the room like a man approaching his sentencing. His eyes immediately found the twins sleeping in their clear hospital bassinets, and his face crumpled with emotion so raw it was almost painful to witness. "They're beautiful," he whispered. Maria watched him carefully, noting how he didn't approach, and didn't assume he had the right to touch them. "You can hold them," she said finally. "They're your children too." He moved slowly, picking up his son, first with hands that trembled. The baby stirred but didn't wake, tiny fingers curling reflexively around his father's thumb. Maria saw tears fall onto her son's blanket, watched her husband's lips move in what looked like a silent apology to a child who couldn't yet understand the complexity of what had been broken and might never be fully repaired. When he gently returned their son to the bassinet and picked up their daughter, his voice broke completely. "I don't deserve them. I don't deserve you. But I swear I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of this gift." Maria's voice was quiet but firm. "They deserve better than what we had. Better than lies and manipulation and silence when truth is needed. If you're going to be their father, you need to be someone who shows them that love means standing up for the people you care about, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." He nodded, unable to speak, cradling their daughter like she was made of glass. After a long moment, he returned her to the bassinet and turned to face Maria directly. "I know you haven't decided about us, about whether there's a future, but I need to tell you what I've been doing these past 3 weeks." Maria leaned back against her pillows, exhausted but listening. He pulled a chair closer, but didn't sit. "I started therapy. Real therapy, not the corporate wellness kind. A specialist in family systems and manipulation. I'm learning about enmeshment, about how I was raised to prioritize my mother's emotions over my own judgment, over everything else. He paused. It's not an excuse, but it's helping me understand how I became someone who could betray you so completely. Maria remained silent, letting him continue. I've also been meeting with every person who worked with you on the deals my mother and I stole credit for. Apologizing, publicly acknowledging your work, correcting the record in every space where lies were told. He pulled out his phone, showing her emails, meeting notes, and official company documents. The board meeting last week, the one you missed because you were on bed rest. I spent an hour detailing every contribution you made to every deal over the past year. Not because your grandfather told me to, because it was the truth that should have been told months ago. Maria scrolled through the evidence, seeing the documentation of her work finally being attributed correctly, seeing her name restored to accomplishments that had been stolen. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And my mother, she asked. He sat down then, his expression hardening. Gone. Completely. She tried to contact me 17 times in the first week. I blocked her. She showed up at the house. I called the police. She sent her lawyer with threats. I sent mine with a restraining order. He met Maria's eyes. She will never be allowed near our children. Not at birthdays, not at holidays, not ever. That's non-negotiable. Maria studied him, searching for signs that this was a performance, that he was saying what he thought she wanted to hear. But what she saw was different. Exhaustion, genuine commitment, and something that looked like the beginning of actual change. What about the company? She asked. Your grandfather appointed you chief strategy officer, like he offered. The board ratified it unanimously. Your office is ready whenever you want to return. He hesitated. I've been running your old deals until you come back, keeping everything exactly as you structured it. Not making changes or improvements, just maintaining what you built until you're ready to take over fully. It was the right approach. Not trying to fix or enhance her work, just protecting it. Maria felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of anger that had been wound so tight for so long it had become part of her structure. She wasn't ready to forgive, wasn't ready to trust, but she was ready to consider the possibility that healing might be achievable. Not certainty. Just possibility. I'm not coming home yet, she said finally. I'm staying with my mother and grandfather for at least 3 months. The twins need stability, and I need space from that house and all the memories it holds. He nodded. I understand. The house is yours if you want it. I'll move out. Or we sell it and both start fresh somewhere else. Whatever you need. Maria considered this. I don't want it. Too much poison in those walls. Sell it. Use the money for the twins' education fund. He pulled out a folder she hadn't noticed him carrying. Already done. I listed it 2 weeks ago. Got an offer yesterday. The entire sale goes into a trust for them, completely separate from either of our personal accounts. Maria took the folder, seeing the legal documents that proved his words. This was different from apologies. This was action. Concrete steps toward rebuilding rather than just promises of change. You can visit, she said carefully. The twins. Not me, not us, but them. Supervised at first. At my grandfather's house. With my mother present. If you prove yourself consistent, we'll revisit the terms. His face showed relief, so profound it was almost painful. Thank you. I know you don't owe me even that much. Maria's voice was steady. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because children deserve fathers who show up. And I'm giving you the chance to be that. But the moment you miss a visit, the moment you prioritize something else over them, the moment you bring any trace of your mother's influence into their lives, you're done. He stood, nodding seriously. Understood. Completely. As he moved toward the door, Maria called out one more time. And for the record, therapy isn't a 3-week project. It's a years-long commitment. If you're serious about change, you don't stop when things get comfortable. You keep going. You keep digging. You keep choosing the hard truth over the easy lie. He paused at the doorway, looking back at the twins sleeping peacefully, at Maria exhausted but unbroken, at the family he'd almost destroyed through weakness and complicity. I know. And I will. When he left, Maria's mother entered, having waited outside during the entire conversation. How do you feel? She asked. Maria looked at her babies, at the life growing in front of her, at the possibility of healing that existed alongside the reality of pain. Tired, hopeful, scared, relieved, everything at once. Her mother sat beside the bed. That's appropriate. Healing isn't linear. Some days you'll believe reconciliation is possible. Other days you'll wonder why you're even trying. Both feelings can be true at the same time. Over the following weeks, Maria settled into motherhood with the same intensity she'd brought to everything else in her life. The twins were demanding, exhausting, and absolutely perfect. Her grandfather's brownstone became a sanctuary where she could heal without pressure, where her competence as a mother was never questioned, where help was offered freely, without judgment. Her husband visited 3 times a week, always punctual, always respectful of boundaries, always focused entirely on the twins. He changed diapers without complaint. He learned to swaddle properly after watching tutorial videos. He sat for hours holding them while they slept, as if trying to memorize their faces. Maria watched these visits carefully, noting the consistency, the genuine engagement, the absence of any attempt to use the children to manipulate her emotionally. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was an observation, data collection. The same strategic approach she'd used in business now applied to the most important deal of her life. 8 weeks after the twins were born, Maria attended her first board meeting as Chief Strategy Officer. She'd lost most of the pregnancy weight, but still moved carefully. Still felt the exhaustion of sleepless nights and constant nursing. But when she walked into that boardroom, dressed in a power suit that fit perfectly, her presentation materials prepared with her characteristic thoroughness, something shifted in the room. These were many of the same people who'd watched her humiliation at the gala. Some had stayed silent. Some had participated. All of them remembered. But now she stood at the head of the table, her grandfather beside her, and the power dynamic had fundamentally changed. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and commanding. "I'm Maria Chun-Martinez, Chief Strategy Officer. Some of you know my work. Others only thought you did. Let's make sure everyone understands going forward exactly who does what in this company." She spent the next hour outlining her vision for the company's future, her strategic priorities, her expectations for transparency and accountability. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Genuine this time, based on respect earned rather than status assumed. Gerald, the executive who'd questioned her months earlier, approached afterward. "Maria, I owe you an apology. A real one. I let biases cloud my judgment. I failed to stand up for you when it mattered. That won't happen again." Maria studied him, seeing genuine remorse. "Apology noted. Now prove it by being the ally I needed then, for whoever else in this company might be facing similar situations." He nodded. "You have my word." One by one, colleagues approached, some apologizing, some congratulations. Some simply acknowledged that they'd witnessed injustice and done nothing. Maria accepted each interaction with grace, but didn't absolve anyone easily. Forgiveness was earned, not freely given. When the room finally cleared, Robert approached. "You were magnificent. Your father would have been so proud." Maria felt tears prick her eyes. "I wish he could have seen this, seen the twins. Know that everything he sacrificed wasn't wasted." Robert's hand on her shoulder was gentle. "He knows. Wherever he is, he knows. And he's celebrating." That evening, as Maria nursed the twins before bed, her mother sat beside her. "Have you thought more about your husband? About reconciliation?" Maria was quiet for a long moment. "I think about it constantly. About whether love that was poisoned can ever be fully cleansed. About whether I'm strong enough to risk trusting him again. About what's best for the twins versus what's best for me." Her mother nodded. "Those are the right questions. Better than rushing to forgiveness because it's easier than holding boundaries." Maria looked at her children, at their perfect faces unmarked by the pain their parents had inflicted on each other. I want them to see a marriage built on respect, in truth, on the willingness to fight for each other rather than against. If their father and I can't build that, then being apart is better than modeling dysfunction. Her mother smiled. That's wisdom. Real wisdom that takes most people decades to learn. 3 months after the twins were born, Maria's husband asked if they could talk. Not about the children. About them. They met at the same neutral conference room where they'd had their first real conversation after the gala. This time, when he entered, he looked different. Not just cleaner or more rested, but fundamentally changed. The entitled executive who'd assumed credit for others' work was gone. In his place was someone who looked like he'd spent months staring at uncomfortable truths until they became undeniable. I wanted to update you, he said, sliding a folder across the table. 6 months of therapy records. Not because you asked for them, but because transparency matters. Because you deserve to know that this isn't performance. It's actual work. Maria opened the folder, seeing session notes, homework assignments, progress reports from a therapist who didn't sugarcoat the difficulty of the work being done. My therapist says I may never fully repair the damage I did, he continued. That some breaks are so fundamental they can't be perfectly healed. But she also says that broken bones, when they heal properly, are often stronger than they were before. He paused. I don't know if that's true for marriages, but I like the chance to find out. Maria closed the folder, her decision already made weeks ago, but only now ready to be voiced. I'm not saying yes to going back to what we had. That marriage is dead. It died the night you let your mother humiliate me in front of 50 people. She saw him flinch, but continued. But I'm saying yes to building something new. Something based on who we are now rather than who we were. Something that acknowledges pain rather than pretending it never happened. His eyes filled with tears. I'll take that. Whatever terms you set. Whatever pace you need. I'll take it. Maria pulled out her own folder, one she'd been preparing for weeks. Then here are my terms. Continued therapy for both of us, individually and together. Complete transparency about feelings, doubts, struggles. No secrets. No protecting each other from difficult truths. And if at any point I feel you're slipping back into old patterns, if your mother somehow re-enters the picture, if you take credit for anyone's work or stay silent when truth is needed, we're done. Permanently. No second chances beyond this one. He read through the document carefully, noting each requirement, each boundary, each consequence. When he finished, he signed it without hesitation. These terms are fair. More than fair. I agree with all of it. Maria signed as well, and they sat across from each other, a legal agreement between them that felt both sad and necessary. This doesn't mean I trust you yet, Maria said. Trust is earned slowly, through consistency, honesty, and time. He nodded. I know, and I'm prepared to earn it, however long it takes. They left the conference room separately as they'd arrived. But there was something different now. Not certainty. Not the easy love they'd once shared, but possibility. The chance that two broken people might, through tremendous work and unflinching honesty, build something stronger than what they destroyed. 6 months later, Maria stood in her new home office, a space she designed in the house she and her husband had purchased together after selling the Poison Mansion. The twins were napping in the nursery down the hall. Her husband was downstairs, preparing dinner after a full day of co-parenting that had become their new normal. On her desk sat photos of her grandfather, her mother, her late father, and the twins. Beside them, the contracts for 3 new deals she'd closed that quarter, each one bearing her name prominently. Chief Strategy Officer, granddaughter of Robert Chun, mother, wife, though that title now carried complexity it hadn't before. Maria picked up her phone and recorded a voice note to herself, something she'd started doing as a way to document her journey. Today marks 1 year since the gala. 1 year since everything fell apart and somehow, impossibly, came back together differently. Better maybe. Definitely more honest. She paused, collecting her thoughts. I learned that survival isn't about never breaking. It's about how you rebuild afterward. That silence can be a strategy when used deliberately, but voice is power when wielded carefully. That forgiveness isn't about absolving someone of wrongdoing, but about freeing yourself from the weight of carrying their guilt. She looked around her office at the life she'd built from ruins. My mother-in-law is gone, banned from our lives legally and emotionally. My husband is different, not perfect, still working, still learning, but genuinely different. My children are healthy. My career is thriving. My family is whole in ways I never imagined possible. Maria set down the phone and walked to the window, watching the sun set over the city where she'd fought every battle, and won most of them. Not through loud revenge, not through matching cruelty with cruelty, but through patience, documentation, strategic silence, and the unwavering knowledge that truth eventually becomes undeniable. The woman who'd entered that conference hall 2 years ago would barely recognize who she'd become. And that, Maria realized, was exactly as it should be. Growth wasn't about staying the same. It was about letting pain refine you rather than define you. About choosing who you became after the breaking rather than letting trauma choose for you. Downstairs, she heard her husband call that dinner was ready. Heard the twins starting to wake, their soft cries building toward urgent demands. Heard her mother's laugh as she arrived for the weekly family dinner that had become tradition. This was her life now. Imperfect, complicated, hard-won, and absolutely, undeniably hers. Maria smiled, picked up her daughter, who'd started crying louder, and headed downstairs toward the family that had been torn apart and painstakingly rebuilt. Not perfect, but real. And sometimes that was more than enough. The question wasn't whether betrayal could be survived. Maria had proven it could. The question was what you built afterward, in the space where trust used to be easy. And the answer was this: something stronger, something honest, something worth fighting for. Not because it was comfortable, but because it was true. And truth, Maria had learned, was the only foundation that could support the weight of real love. Everything else was just beautiful lies waiting to collapse. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to subscribe and drop a comment telling us the part of the story you enjoyed most.